Welcome to another edition of the Sim Racing Garage. I'm Barry Rowland, and in this episode, we'll be reviewing the newly released sequential shifter from the guys at ProSim. It's called the ProSim Lite. Now, John Beeson from Leo Bodner Electronics has recently joined forces with Adrian Quaife at ProSim. The mission statement at ProSim is to develop a line of very high-quality racing simulator products. ProSim, which is now working together with Quaife Engineering, which just happens to be a well-known performance and race car driveline manufacturer, are out to produce the best simulator hardware available. And ProSim is also now the sole distributor for what I personally consider the premier force feedback steering wheel system available today, Leo Bodner Sim Steering Wheel brand. Now, this is a first in a series of simulator shifters that ProSim will be bringing to market. So let's take a closer look at the shifter itself. Okay, now for a closer look at the ProSim Lite sequential shifter, manufactured by Quaife. First off, we got some nice screen printing here showing the logos and the labeling. And all this is powder coated hardened steel. Every part on this is hardened steel. I'm going to talk about that in a second. Feels very substantial in your hand. When you pick this thing up, you know you've got a good piece of kit in your hands. It has plexiglass windows, so you can actually see what's going on inside of here on the front, top, and on the bottom. They don't even have anything, so you can actually see all the inner workings. They're very proud, apparently, of this shifter and what they've done here, and they want the whole world to see. Now, we'll actually do an inside look, and I'm going to pull one of these plates off so we can see it even better, but we'll get to that later. Now, this crazy looking thing here, well, that is actually a tensioner adjustment for the shift tension on the shifter. And you can make that really hard or soft, and again, we'll talk more about that when we take a look inside. Now, on the front is where the USB is, and it's the USB-B type connector, like most of the USB devices we have in sim racing. And we have the shift handle here, which is actually a plastic nylon. And actually, when I first used this, or when I first saw that rather, I wasn't sure if I was going to like this or not, because I have a different kind of shifter that I've been using, and you guys have probably seen on videos before, and it's the Arc Carbon, and I'll show you another picture of it here. And this has a big fat handle on it that I put on, and it's a Sparco handle that I've been using, and I really kind of like the feel of this shifter, especially with a driving glove on. And when I saw this, I said, oh no, that's another skinny one, I'm not going to like that. But I must admit that when I'm actually driving with this and just grabbing it and doing quick shifts and going back to the wheel, this really is feeling pretty good. And if you don't like the plastic part, there's just a screw on the top here. We can take it off. And this whole handle comes off the shaft here. And they actually make an aluminum one. And I got a picture of it here. That's another 10 pounds British sterling if you want to get that when you get your shifter or after you get your shifter. They also have, speaking of the actual shifter shaft here, they have an extension available that can goes from 150 to 80 millimeters of extension. So if you need a higher handle, then you can actually get the extension. Now, the shifter as it is here, I was able to fabricate a bracket and mount it on my existing mounting hardware on my Stage 4 rig to where this really just landed, luckily for me, right where I need it to. So it's pretty ergonomic. I don't think I'm going to need an extension for this, but I might get one anyway along with the aluminum handle just to check it out and see what it looks like and feels like. Right. So again, when you pick this up, this is a hefty piece of kit here. It really is heavy, and how heavy is it? Well, especially for a sequential shifter, it is 6 pounds and 3 ounces. You guys see that all right? And we go to the metric, and it's 2.8 kilos, almost 3 kilos. So this, again, is a very heavy shifter, especially when I compare it to my former heavyweight champ, the ARC Carbon shifter. And that comes in at 1.2 kilos, or you guys on the standard weighing system, 2 pounds, 10.5 ounces. So this is definitely, the ProSim Lite is definitely a more substantial shifter. Scales out of the way. Let's see if there's anything else we want to talk about here. Oh yeah, all the parts are hardened in this, including the side plates, to a Rockwell hardness of 60. And obviously that's going to improve durability and wearability. They also have a burning process that on these black parts of the assembly you see in here. That's kind of a rust preventative, if you will. It's called a blackening process, or a burning process where they burn them somehow or heat them up and then they turn them black. So inside the shafts, or inside the shafts where things are moving, like your shifter handle, the shafts in there, and the daisy wheel over here that moves when you shift, they're riding on bronze bushings, which give you very long life and shouldn't have to worry about replacing those anytime soon. Now the electronics in here, you can see these blue things. Instead of using switches, physical switches, which most sequentials, in fact all the sequentials I've used before use, these are actually hall sensor switches. So there is no contact of the switch. It just goes over the switch whichever way we're shifting it. And of course that sends the signal to the electronic board, and we shift in our simulator games. So very nice feature also, again, for longevity. This thing was built to last a long time. I can tell that already. I mean, you should be able to just hammer on this thing for years without having any problems the way it's built. And we're going to take this one further as far as how good is it built and how everything works in it. Because what I'm going to do is, I'm not going to pull this one off, I'm going to pull this plate off. And when we come back, we're actually going to take a look inside and talk more about how this thing is actually built. Very, very similar, almost exactly like a real sequential shifter assembly would be built if you had a sequential transmission in your race car. So we'll do that next. So now we've got the side of the shifter exposed, or a cutaway view if you will. Took the plate off, and I had to put a washer here and a washer here on this shaft. This is to retain the daisy wheel so it doesn't slide off, and also over here on the ratchet claw, it's captured by a spring over here to give it that spring action. And we'll talk a little about that in a minute too. But first we'll just talk about the tensioner here. And we saw it before. You don't touch the bolt down here, or rather the nut down here that's on a big threaded bolt that's hollowed out. And you can see it's actually captured by some hex screws up here on either side of it. So that's set at the factory. Don't ever mess with that, and you don't need to mess with this part of it either. Now, the only thing you will be moving is this nut and this bolt that has the little straight groove on the top of it. This is a 22 millimeter bolt, or rather nut. And we'll just go ahead and pull this off to see the workings of it. And as we saw, the ball bearing was riding up on that. It's got a spring in here to capture this ball bearing and also provide tension to the ball bearing that's riding into the grooves on our daisy wheel. Simple enough. The only two things you have to watch out for on this tension adjustment is that you don't leave it too loose, because then this will flop all around because there's no tension, there's no proper tension of this pin against the side of the claw part of our ratchet claw. Or don't put it down too tight, because then you'll compress the spring all the way and it won't be able to compress so that the ball bearing can move up over the ridge, and then of course you won't be able to shift them. But you'll know that as soon as you do it, because you won't be able to shift anymore. Alright, so I'm going to put enough tension on this thing that it's not real hard for me to shift, hopefully. Alright, maybe a little less than that. Even less. Yeah, that's about right. Still working. That's the main thing. Alright, so let's talk a little bit about the daisy wheel. And this has pins on it, and it's called a pin daisy wheel. Now, in a real transmission, you'll see something similar to this in some of the sequentials. And typically you'll find a gear on the other side instead of just that shaft there. There'll be some kind of a gearing, a planetary gear maybe, and I'll show you some pictures of that in a second, that will actually turn the gear selector drum. Now, here's a cutaway from Quaife that actually shows the actual shifter they used in the development of the ProSim Lite shifter. And here you can see the daisy wheel. Well, you can't really see the daisy wheel because the planetary gear is hiding it. And that planetary gear will in turn be turning a gearing or a gear that's on the gear selector drum as seen in this picture. It's a small picture, but you get the point. So now we're actually turning that gear selector drum by turning a daisy wheel with our shifter. So that's the real way a sequential works, and that's the way that this sequential is working. And that's why you can feel the difference. As soon as you get this shifter in your hands and you use it, it's right away you can feel that you're doing something here as far as the shifting is going. You're turning something. It just feels like you're turning that gear selector drum. And of course, when you put the right tension on this, it really feels a lot better than it does in my hand right this second because it's so light. I wouldn't ever set it that way, but you get the idea. Now, moving on to the actual claw itself, and again, this is actually a tooled steel ratchet claw. The rest of the stuff, as I said before, is hardened to a Rockwell hardness of 60, and that's everything in here. Spacers, bolts, whatever they could use in here has all been hardened to that. And they put a burn finish on it again to avoid any rusting. So this had to be tool steel because it's really doing a lot of work here, and it's going to last forever. You don't want to ever having a problem with one of these little winglets breaking off. And if we look at those winglets, of course we have the space inside of here that allows the pins to be inside 3 at a time. But then on the wings here, we have an angle. It's about 35, 40 degrees maybe. I didn't really measure it. And the reason that's there is because when we actually make a shift, you can see that wing goes over top of the pin as it's sitting on top of it. And as the spring tension pushes the shifter back down to the neutral or middle position, that needs to ride over the pin like that against the spring on the shaft over here, and it falls back in between the 3 pins. So that's how that's working. And again, you don't want this breaking off, and that would be a big problem. You wouldn't be shifting one way or the other. And actually, I've actually seen races where transmissions are broken, and it was actually the claw turning the mechanism. One side broke because they could only shift down. They couldn't shift up. If you've ever seen a problem like that with a transmission in a real race. Right. So again, these are riding on bronze bushes under here. There's a spring here. You can see under there. It's actually the return spring, if you will, for the actual shifter lever. So whenever I shift, that spring will turn the lever. It puts pressure on returning the lever back to center. And you can see where it's actually resting in there on a stop. And that stop is actually attached to the side of the plate here. And on the other side of the stop is the other side of the spring, which is not as easy to see through the plexiglass here, but I will give it an attempt, or make an attempt. See if you can see it in there. You might be able to get a view of it there. Okay, anyway. So you got one on each side, so it returns either way, and that's what gives it the pivot action. Right, so now let's talk a little bit about the electronics in here. And again, as we said before, these are Hall sensors, so that the shifting action is not hitting a switch. It's floating above the sensor, and you look close up here if it's actually working when I shift. So you can see it's over it now, and that would indicate a shift to the electronics board, which would mean a shift in our simulator on the computer. So there's no wear and tear on that, which is a great idea. I really like that concept instead of having a switch in there. Again, everything well thought out here. There's actually a BU0836 Bodner board in here, and I don't know if I can get a good enough angle here for you to, there, got one right there. Anyway, so it's a great board, a USB board. A lot of manufacturers use that board in their shifters. So really there's not much else to see or talk about here. It's pretty straightforward in what they've done, and they've done a wonderful job. And really, once you drive this and you get it in hand and you're shifting, it's something totally unique and different than what I'm used to from all the other shifters that I've ever used as far as a sequential shifter. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to have to manufacture or fab up, as usual, a plate. So I got some L plate that I'm going to mount this to so I can mount it to the stage 4 rig over there in an ergonomic position for myself. And I'm going to show you a little bit of that just real quick. And if you don't want to see that, obviously, you've got different segments in the video. You can just jump right over to see me actually driving the shifter and making comments while I'm actually using the shifter. So we'll get to that next. Right, so now I've got to get this shifter mounted over there to the stage 4 rig. And as usual, I'm having to fabricate something to make it fit. Nothing ever fits on the stage 4 rig out of the box. I don't think I've ever gotten anything to bolt on there without having to make some modifications. Anyway, no big deal. As you've seen before in some of my videos, we love machining aluminum bits to make brackets and different spacers and things that we're going to need for our sim rig. Now, this is a 5" by 3" aluminum bracket that I cut off an existing piece of scrap that I had laying around, and it actually fit pretty well as far as the shifter is concerned. If the shifter lined up, it doesn't hang off the edges, and I have a little bit of aluminum left on the side over here, as you can see. So a perfect fit, if you will. And it gives me enough side over here to actually mount it to the existing bracket work that I have for my shifter on the Stage 4 rig. Now, of course, the usual things apply. We have to set it up, get everything straightened, we mark our holes, and then, of course, as you see here, we drill through and get our holes. And then once our holes are done, well, we could just go ahead and run a bolt through it and put a nut on the other side, and that would work. It would fasten it just fine. But I like to go ahead and use a screw instead of a bolt with a nut on the other side, because it's just a lot easier to do, to take off and put on. So here you can see I'm actually tapping the holes that I already drilled so that we have a 1/4" by 20 pitch thread in our holes. And once we have that, I have one of those screws here, and this is actually a big screw head on this that comes with the 1080 profile fastener sets. And I really like these because of you don't have to put a washer on most times, or in most cases anyway. But once you have it threaded, all we've got to do is set our shifter on top of it, if we can hold on to our screws, and just screw it in and out. That way it's easier to attach to the plate and take it off the plate for whatever needs we have. And because I do a lot of videos and stuff, I'm always taking stuff apart and moving things around, so it makes it easy on me. So I taught myself how to run that tap in and out of holes easily, and the rest is history. So I highly suggest you guys learn how to do that. It's not that hard, so that you can actually add fasteners like screws to anything you want to. Right. And we also have 2 holes that I've drilled here for my bigger 8mm bolts. And these bolts will go in this way, so that the head is pointing towards the shifter body. And I'll actually bolt this with a nut on the other side of my bracketry that I've already talked about on the Stage 4 rig. So now that we've got everything done, and we know that the shifter is lining up properly with the holes, what we'll do next is go ahead and mount the bracket and take a look at the bracket mounted, and then we'll put the shifter on and see how it all went. Okay, it's all mounted up, and you can see that the screws are put into the aluminum plate, front and back. And if we go around the side here, we can see them over here on the side. And also notice that the heads of those 2 8mm bolts, we have got plenty of room between the housing body side of the shifter and the bracket and the head of the bolts. We'll go around here to side, and again, you can see the offset and how the shifter is sitting back from the actual bracket there. And you can see, if I come across there, I go around the side here, you can see that the shifter is almost equal with the steering wheel, enough that it really makes no difference with my hand being on the steering wheel. Coming from the steering wheel and getting to the handle of that shifter is really easy. So I guess there's only one thing left to do, and that is to take this shifter for a test run. So that's what we'll do next. Okay, here we are at Circuit Park Zandvoort, and we're in the Lotus 79. I thought this would be a good combination for testing this sequential. And one of the first things you notice about this sequential is when you're doing your shifting, whether it be upshifting or downshifting, it just feels pretty natural what you think you should be feeling if you were really had a sequential transmission in your car and you were moving that daisy wheel and in turn moving the gears that move the drum selector. It just feels right, like you can imagine that you're actually using it. And where I have it located is very ergonomic. It's very easy for me to reach. Don't even have to think about it. It's just second nature after driving enough and after a while, which with most things I suppose you set up in your simulator once you get used to them. But this thing became just like an extension of driving the car. Once I started driving, after a few days, I just can't live without it now, it seems like, with these cars. It just feels that good. And also, dialing the tension is important. At least I feel it's important on this shifter to get the feel that you like and make it feel like you're actually manipulating a transmission or a sequential transmission or any kind of driveline equipment that you actually are shifting on. It gives you some telltale feedback that, yeah, you've done something when you hit the shifter. Instead of a lot of the sequential shifters, you'll just shift it and you hit the bump, the end bump on the upshift or the downshift, wherever it is on that shifter, and it's just some springs, and that's about all it feels like. Even if it has some kind of a cam action in it, it just doesn't feel like you're really hitting something or manipulating some piece of equipment or some metal pieces in a transmission. But this shifter actually feels to me like you can feel like you're doing something. You're actually moving it. It's quite unique, actually. I'm surprised about how well it felt when I first started using it. I thought, wow, this is like I'm really in a sequential. Now, I did use a sequential transmission a long time ago, back when I was doing some circuit racing, and that was a long time ago. So I can't even begin to remember what it really felt like, but it seems like this is what it should feel like. And I know that the guys at ProSim spent a lot of time of development with Quaife Engineering to get this right, and I really think they got it right. They did a good job with it. It's just, you can just hammer on this thing and it just feels solid every time. It's just amazing what they can do nowadays. It just seems to be getting better and better as far as the sim hardware that's available to the sim racer today, albeit at a price, because this is a rather expensive shifter. But it's easy to see why it costs what it costs. Once you're in the cockpit and you're driving the car around, it's like I said, you know why it costs what it costs. And every time you bang it against the stop and you're turning that daisy wheel with the proper tension on it, it's like, wow, I'm really shifting something. Anyway, as you can probably tell, I really, really like this shifter because it's a completely different experience than any other sequential shifter I've ever tried or used. And I've tried a lot of them. I really have. And this one obviously is taking it to another level. And I think it's easy to see why, because of, as you saw on the inside look on it, the mechanicals of this shifter and what it's doing. So anyway, we'll go ahead and end the driving test now and get on to the final thoughts. And what I'll do is I'll go ahead and just ramp up the volume like I normally do at the end of the driving test, and we'll just fade out to the final thoughts. Final thoughts on the ProSim Lite sequential shifter. First off, I'd like to commend the guys at ProSim for bringing such a unique sequential shifter to market. Its design, production, and execution is just all around top flight. From the materials used to the care and precision in the manufacturing of this unit, it's easy to see that they loved what they were doing when they made this just by having the shifter in hand, let alone taking it for a test drive. This shifter feels like you're actually manipulating a piece of driveline equipment. With the proper tension dialed in, it was easy for me to imagine that I'm turning a real gear selector drum in a real sequential transmission. Now for a con. Well, with great equipment comes greater manufacturing cost, and this is reflected in the price of the shifter. At around $450 US delivered, this is the most expensive shifter I've tested to date. But not to worry, I am in line to get one of the new H-pattern shifters that ProSim is working on, which hopefully will be coming out soon. And that's going to cost around twice as much as this did, maybe a little more. And really, that's the only con I can find with this great shifter. Now for the pros. Well, as I've already said, this gives you a completely different experience from any other sequential out there. It feels like it's in a class of its own. And even though the admission price is steep, at least you shouldn't have to worry about it breaking anytime soon, because all the parts in here are hardened to Rockwell 60, and this unit is built to race car quality standards. I've been pounding on this thing for a while now, and it hasn't even broken a sweat. So, if you have the means and are looking for, in what my opinion is the most realistic feeling sequential shifter available today, then you owe it to yourself to get a ProSim Lite sequential shifter. Enough said. I'm Barry Rowland, and thanks again for watching the Sim Racing Garage channel.